The UK's Conservative Party has been in power since 2010. Now, after a series of scandals and mounting anger over the rising cost of living, the opposition Labour Party senses an opportunity to take over. But with elections widely expected next year, is Labour actually in a position to win and govern? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Great to have your company. Now, the UK's Labour Party has been in the political wilderness for 13 years. Over that time, the ruling Conservatives have become increasingly unpopular. Labour now lead the Tories by a wide margin in opinion polls. But can they translate that into an election-winning formula?
Where do we want it? Now!
Protests over wages and the rising cost of living.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise.
A scandal over parties held during COVID lockdowns.
I had to take the decision, because of the economic situation, to adjust our policies.
And the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister of modern times. These are just some of the lows the UK's ruling Conservative Party has endured in recent years. It's little surprise then that the opposition Labour Party has been growing in popularity. According to polling firm Ipsos, Labour's lead over the Tories has widened significantly since Keir Starmer became leader of the opposition in July 2020. Starmer has shifted Labour sharply towards the centre of British politics, a radical change from the party of his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn, whose far-left policies appealed to Labour's base, but alienated many others, and resulted in a disastrous showing in the 2019 general election. Now, with a mix of policies that promise to move the UK towards a greener economy while being fiscally responsible, Labour looks like it's in a strong position to form the next government. But could the divisions of its recent past re-emerge?
Well, let's meet our guests. In the studio is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Special Advisor to the UK Home Office, Norman Baker, former Liberal Democrat and Home Office Minister, and Denis MacShane, former Labour Party Minister for Europe. Denis, I'm going to come to you first. Keir Starmer heading to Paris, an invite from President Macron, no less. What do we make of that?
A very big turnaround in protocol. The rules are that when you're the head of government, you don't invite the leader of the opposition parties from other countries to come and see you officially. This is Macron, who really was brutally, crudely and rudely treated by Boris Johnson. Donnez-nous un break, Emmanuel. And then the wonderful Liz Truss asked, is he friend or foe? Oh, I think the jury's still out on that. And, you know, you don't talk to the President of France or America. You could maybe talk to Putin like that. And it was so dumb. And now he's just saying, I've got King Charles coming the week. I'm going to bring Keir Starmer here to give me a briefing on the state of the royal family and the state of the realm in Britain. It's very, very significant. Plus the other trips that he's undertaking.
Claire, this really makes Starmer look like an international statesman before he's even got into office, doesn't it?
It does. Now, this should really worry the government because you have the leader of the opposition party going over there having high-level talks with the president of our nearest neighbour. It has never happened before. As Denis said, this is not what happens. This is not how protocol works. So the government needs to be on its game a little bit better and understand where the relationships have gone wrong. Now, they've gone wrong in many, many places. Lastly, back in 2016, I think that's the one that really did it for us in Europe, which was the Brexit referendum. So there is an awful lot of ground to make up. Now, whether the government can do that in 12 months or less seems to be in question right now.
Norman, we've seen this before, haven't we, with leaders of the opposition in the United Kingdom. When Tony Blair was in opposition, he made friends with the Clinton administration. David Cameron, he reached out to Barack Obama. It's all about building relationships for when you get the big job.
Well, it makes you look better as a statesman if you're going abroad and meeting people already in power, because it elevates you to that position. But Denis's analysis was quite correct, actually. This is payback, frankly, for the disgraceful way in which the British government has treated the French and indeed the rest of the European Union since Brexit. They've regarded them as enemies, as people to be ignored. They've reached out to India, to New Zealand, to Australia, to anybody apart from our near neighbours. And it's ridiculous policy. And they're going to pay for that, I think. But what Keir Starmer's doing as well, I think, is trying to send a message that he's slightly more pro-European than the government is, not difficult actually, but also without reopening, if he can avoid it, the whole question of Brexit, because that's a difficult thing for both Labour and Conservative.
Denis, I want to come to you. What issues will they be talking about in Paris when they sit down at the Elysée?
Well, the big one for President Macron, indeed for almost every European leader, is, we call it the boat crisis. It is the astonishing surge of undocumented people coming into the European Union, some claiming refuge, most wanting simply to work. And we're going to get another shed load after that catastrophic earthquake in Libya. I mean, in 2011, David Cameron, William Hague, Nick Clegg just destroyed the Libyan state, created a failed state in London with the help of, that chap Nicolas Sarkozy, don't mention him. And Libya, ever since, is a failed state, as Syria is, just as Iraq under the Labour government, Afghanistan. And we've created all these gateways of hell, and everybody's got their iPhone now and just thinks my life would be better if I can get to Germany or France or indeed to Britain. So that's number one issue. I don't think it'll be much on Brexit. The government's actually made very modest steps, rejoining Horizon, saying it will cooperate with Frontex, that's the EU border agency. That's not really a big deal because Russia has a deal with Frontex. Fat lot of good that was when he invaded Ukraine. But you can sense now, every opinion poll just says Brexit now, the British people think it is just a historic mistake. A bit like prohibition in the United States, a bit before our time. You know, whether for 15 years they said you couldn't have a drink in America. And after a bit, the Americans said, you gave rise to a lot of criminality. It's given rise to really the most destructive politics in my lifetime in Britain. I mean, both Tories and Labour have been absolutely consumed by Brexit for 5, 6, 7 years. Coming out of it now, Rishi Sunak is sound sane after Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. And Keir Starmer obviously is a very sane, sensible, middle of the road, just balanced individual, Mr. Normal.
Claire, do you think the French have looked at successive UK governments, not got anywhere relationship-wise, and they look at Starmer and they just think, you know what, let's just invite him in, sit him down, see what he's like, test his mettle and see, can we work with this guy?
I think that, yes, to an extent that's going to be true, but also we know that Sir Keir Starmer is much more in favour of a relationship with the EU than the Conservative government. So I think that Emmanuel Macron is going to work along that level to see how far he could perhaps push that. And that's the really interesting part of this, is that Keir Starmer is saying the Labour Party will not take us back into Europe, and that is always a big argument in this country. But he is now looking at perhaps buying into the share of refugees coming over to the UK as other EU states do, which is interesting because that's sort of part of Europe, but not. Would we be fined if we didn't take these individuals? And when you look at what is already happening within the Schengen zone with places like Poland and Hungary who don't want to accept the EU's ruling on how many migrants each country is going to take, you do wonder why Sir Keir Starmer wants to go and start that relationship on that particular issue when he really hasn't solved any other issues. So there is some progress that he's making. But I think that this is more for Emmanuel Macron to see how much he could get out of it for his country than the benefit to Britain.
I have to say, I disagree with Claire, admire her. If you look at today's news, Germany has just closed its frontiers physically to any migrants coming in from Italy. And France has done the same. There's actually kind of almost armed police now sealing Italy off because of all of the boats that arrive. And all that Mrs. Meloni, as a descendant, admirer of Mussolini, wants to do is ship everybody up the road to France or Italy. She's also, by the way, said she wants to take in 425,000 non-EU migrants because Italians aren't having any more babies. Maybe where the Pope lives, but believe me, there's just the Catholic Italian mama surrounded by lots of little babies is a thing of the past. So all over Europe, that old idea that you could share out refugees, it would all be solved at a European level is frankly for the birds. And Macron and Starmer will have a good bilateral discussion, particularly on what they can do. I think France doesn't like the idea that 100 miles of its coastline is just the jump-off point for all these illegal immigrants.
But those would be the same French that took the money off of the UK government and have admitted that they haven't done nearly enough to protect their own coastline. So, I mean, I think there are arguments on both sides of this.
Well,
and I do think this is Macron shoring up
this,
his own future.
Look, Macron hasn't got a future. In a very literal sense, he can't be re-elected. So just drop the idea that Macron's looking over his shoulder at votes. His biggest problem is finding a successor who wouldn't lose to Marine Le Pen. Most of that money was to build a immigrant processing centre in France, giant physical building. It's, I mean, the French cops are there with their knives, destroying the little rubber boats, but you can't stop the fact we take far fewer of these undocumented migrants than France, Germany, Sweden, Spain, Italy. Nobody in Britain will say that, but we are actually the least impacted of the big European countries.
Coming back to the United Kingdom right now, I want to take a look at the very latest poll we have from Ipsos, which says that 45% of voters would vote for Labour if there were an election tomorrow. 28% would vote for the current incumbent Conservative Party, and 12% said they would vote for your Liberal Democrats, Norman.
Well, look, I mean, people are in 1996 mode, in my view, which is ABC, anyone but Conservatives. They've not listened to the government anymore. They've written them off. They're waiting for the election and they'll vote for anybody to get rid of the Conservatives. That's where a lot of people are. Now, so those figures, I think, are... The interesting figure there is the 28% for the Conservatives. That's the relevant figure there. The Labour-Lib Dem figure will depend on where you are in the country, because when it comes to a particular seat, people will say, who can beat the Conservatives? If it's the Lib Dems, they'll vote Lib Dem. If it's Labour, they'll vote Labour. That's what we saw in '97 when Tony Blair got in, and the Lib Dems did very well in that particular election. But that's where we are. They will make the first past the post system work to defeat the present incumbent Conservative government.
Do you think your party is coming back maybe to the strengths numbers it had in 2010?
Well, I think we'll do rather well. And it's interesting, my personal view is that the Conservative vote is softer in the south than it is in the north. The people, the Tory voters in the south often care about things like sewage and rivers, which the people in the north, not saying they don't care about it, but they care slightly less about it. There's a lot of businesses down here, what we call soft Tories, who are horrified by the Brexit consequences for business and want to see something better. I mean, I think we could do rather well. I mean, I'm frustrated, frankly, with my own party because we have got this European problem. We've got a Brexit problem which we've inherited, which no one's saying very much about, apart from Stephen Fry, apparently, on TV last week. And actually, why don't Lib Dem say something? Because the Conservatives and Labour have both got problems saying something about it for different reasons.
You did last time round, and look how that ended.
Well, I know that's true. That's what's holding them, the Lib Dems back. But my view is the public now is ready for a party to say this hasn't worked, and for an open discussion in the population at large as what we do about it. We don't necessarily go back to where we were because that's not possible. But we should be looking, for example, at trying to ease the single market or get business working better than it's presently working.
Denis, I want to ask you just about the poll. 45% of voters, if there were an election tomorrow, would vote Labour. Keir Starmer just needs to be very balanced and keep his head down and just get to next year, doesn't he? Is that it?
Very, very much so. I mean, we've heard that term debanking, banks closing all over the country, and the term defunding, particularly defunding the police. You remember a year or two ago. I think what Keir is doing, what the Labour Party is doing, is de-targeting. It's just removing itself as any possible target. And then the voters simply will actually vote what they feel or who they feel have let them down. I still think, Norman, there's still a bit of a legacy over the Nick Clegg behaviour 2010, 2015.
It's nearly all gone, Dennis.
Most of it's gone. Most of it's gone. Students, anybody who's a student, and all the people who suddenly had their student fees increased after 2010, they're now young adults. So I'm not sure. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a huge hole in the market for any party that can find, not rejoin, but much stronger language on Europe than, frankly, the big three are doing. I mean, they're the three wise monkeys: see no Europe, hear no Europe, say no Europe.
Mm.
Claire, just on that, if you were advising Rishi Sunak right now on the back of the polling where he is, Starmer the other day called him inaction man in Parliament. What would you say to Sunak trying to find a positive for him to come out against Starmer with?
See, now this is really difficult because, as we've seen, every time the government goes to announce something, it all goes horribly wrong. It's done that across the summer every single time. I think what he needs to do is shuffle his cabinet. He needs to be sensible with the people that he has around him. And unfortunately, at the moment, they aren't particularly good at what they do. And I think if you need to be quite brutal in politics and have a bit of a clear out of your cabinet and look who it is you want surrounding you going into a general election. He is going to have to reach out to other parts of the Conservative Party that he currently doesn't have. There is the One Nation Conservatives, who everybody sees as sort of almost the Liberal Democrats of the Conservative Party, and you've got them far on the right and some scattering in the middle. But if you don't do it, if you don't take that brave step and say, do you know what, this person on the One Nation side isn't necessarily popular with the right wing, but I'm going to have them, then that would make him look a lot stronger.
He's too weak, Claire, to do that. He daren't do it because he's frightened of his own backbenchers these days.
Yeah.
And what he's resorting to now, which I find appalling, is because they sneaked home, the Conservatives, in the by-election in Boris Johnson's old seat on the basis of a narrow issue to do with London about low-emission vehicles. He's extrapolated from that the idea if he only takes a view against the environment, suddenly he'll get a whole lot of votes from somewhere or other. So, we're maxing out in oil and gas in the North Sea. We're thinking about postponing the time when people have got to electric cars. I mean, this is irresponsible government. It's also desperate because it won't work.
Well, I think the problem is, just to come back on that very quickly, is the party is so divided, it is so broken, given what happened with Boris Johnson, followed by Liz Truss, and all of the shenanigans with Rishi Sunak getting in, and all of those different parties now being created, Conservative Democratic Organisation, the New Conservatives, the One Nation Conservatives. It is more broken than I think I've seen it in a very long time. And I don't disagree with you. I really wish he would be much stronger and much bolder and make some decisions that might cause an upset for some of his backbenchers, but ultimately may get them re-elected next time.
I wonder too whether actually the big winner in the election next year will be the non-voters. People who just aren't impressed, frankly, by any of the offers. There's no enthusiasm in politics, frankly, at the moment. There's a sense, obviously, the Tory time is running out. We can all agree on that. And that reflects all of Europe. I mean, nowhere in Europe do I spot, I travel around Europe, real enthusiasm for a new set of ideas. There's a nasty surge of what you might call national identity politics, but it tends only to last a short while because you put the national identitarians in, they can't deliver anything.
It's happened in the UK, has it?
Well, they're not really. Put Suella Braverman, it probably represents that European sort of extreme national identity, calling foreign immigrants invaders and talking about British Pakistani men going around raping white girls. I mean, fairly disgusting 1930s language. But is it winning votes? The evidence doesn't seem to be there at the moment.
Can we talk about the issues then in 2024 that Starmer will be campaigning on and could possibly gain even further ground? I mean, is it all going to be about the economy? I know you mentioned rivers and pollution and what have you, but ultimately, is it going to come down to how the British economy is doing?
Well, it often comes down to that at the baseline. There's also issues, of course, about the health service. People care about the health service greatly in this country, so that will be a factor as well. Matters like foreign affairs probably won't intervene very much unless there's a major crisis somewhere in the world bigger than we've seen so far. I think there are issues to do with the environment. I mean, it's not the issue for everybody, but if you can make the environment applicable to people, this is what Lib Dems have, I think, discovered, then you actually gain votes that way. And there is a coterie of people who are Conservative voters who are horrified by the sewage issue in particular. That's what our polling shows. And actually, the government doesn't take it seriously. Terry Coffey is busy ignoring it, and Michael Gove's busy allowing, if he gets his own way, a river to be more polluted to help house builders, who won't build any more houses, by the way, just want more profits. So they're misreading the electorate, I think. So they're all, there's a bank of issues that will come forward, but the economy is a big one, clearly, and health, I would think, is the second one.
Claire, is Sunak inextricably linked to the British economy? The only way he stays in power is if somehow there's a miracle in Britain in the next 12 months.
I think so, and that is the number one issue for people, is how much they have in their pockets after paying their bills. Can they afford to live where they are and feed their families? So that is going to be the number one priority. And Rishi Sunak was a former Chancellor of the Exchequer Finance Ministry, so he is inextricably linked with that, and some of the decisions that he made when he was Chancellor are now coming home to roost, as we've seen with the current situation with concrete crumbling in schools, hospitals and prisons. So I think that he is always going to be attached to it. So that is your number one issue. I think health, as Norman has said, is right up there, but crime is going to be the big one. Now, if Labour are smart, they will look at what's going on in the police service, they will look at what's going on in local communities, and they will come up with a decent policing plan, because currently the government doesn't have one. So I think that those sort of three issues are going to be the main battlegrounds for next year.
Dennis, what issues can you identify?
Very much so. The last point, one of the biggest achievements or biggest wins that Labour got after 1997 was to put another 20,000 uniformed police officers. They're called community support officers. But suddenly, on every street corner, there was somebody in a uniform. Theresa May took all of those away when she was Home Secretary. They're beginning to put some back. But the biggest point we can all share is you never see the cops. Look at this shoplifting wave. If you're a policeman actually walking up and down in front of shops, you know, the bad guys just generally will be a little discouraged. And there's been no leadership from the police. I mean, all these horrible stories about rape and misogyny are true. The police seem to be back there inside, in front of their computer screens, producing their press releases, and not out on the streets reassuring the public.
Dennis, if Keir Starmer becomes the next Labour Prime Minister of Great Britain, what kind of a PM do you think he'll make?
Just very, very steady. If I could tell a little story, a German CDU, that's the Conservative Party, Christian Democratic Party, senior aide in the European Parliament, said to me a few months ago, Dennis, you can speak some German. Can you get Sir Keir to learn some German, please? I said, what are we talking about? He said, well, he is our idea of a perfect politician. He's rather boring. He always reads his text out, prepared, and never deviates. He only allows himself one joke a speech, and never says anything very interesting. Now, that, for Germany, is the man we want to elect to run the country. So,
Claire, is Britain ready for a Germanic Labour leader?
No, but I think that the UK is just fed up with politicians as a whole. So I don't think there is anybody, if you went out onto the street now and said, who is the ideal Prime Minister, everyone would just go, yeah, none of them. We don't like any of them. So I think the real problem is we don't know what it is we actually want. And I think if you took bits of all Prime Ministers and moulded them together, you might well come up with the ideal candidate.
I think the country is falling to bits, to be honest with you. I mean, literally falling to bits in terms of schools and hospitals. But actually, and Keir Starmer has said that there's a huge job to do, which I agree with, to try and get Britain back on its feet again. I really do believe that. The trouble is he hasn't articulated how he will do that. And I think after the next election, he's playing it very safe, as Dennis says. He's not giving any hostages to fortune. But after the next election, we don't quite know which it will be. I'd like him to be a radical Prime Minister. But if he's going to be a safety Prime Minister, he won't be meeting the challenge that Britain needs. And I think Tony Blair and Gordon Brown before 1997 were actually more open about what they were going to do than Keir Starmer has been so far. And actually, I would say to Dennis, the first Labour government, which in 1997 and 2001, I thought was really quite good before Tony Blair discovered Iraq and went off the rails. And I hope that we have a radical government after the next election. But I don't necessarily believe he'll deliver that.
Well, you'll be pleased to hear that in 2 months' time, I'm publishing my diaries for the 1997-2001 government. I hope you give me a very nice review. But don't forget, I remember leaving my house to go up to the constituency in South Yorkshire and seeing giant billboard posters. This is when the election was announced. Tony Blair, I promise you I will not raise any rate of income tax in the first Parliament. I just went back and said, that's it, we've got it. It's in the bag.
Do you sense there's a feeling now that it's almost early '97 for Labour?
No,
a new day is dawning.
I'm very nervous. I'm saying to everybody, Harold Wilson had a 20% lead on the Conservatives in 1963. Sorry to go into history, about the same as Labour has now. He only won with a 4-seat majority. We all thought, I didn't, that it was in the bag in 1992. It wasn't. None of us here have discussed Scotland. I mean, Scotland used to deliver a huge wodge of 40, 50 Labour and more if you add in the Lib Dems, because the Lib Dems were a huge part of the Blair winning coalition. I mean, I'd be delighted to see more Lib Dem MPs win. I'm not sure, Norman, that they're quite going to get as many as you hope.
No, final question.
Sorry, the last point I make on that is that we know that the Conservatives won't have a majority. That is something I can safely predict.
Yes, I think
one more answer. Norman, can Starmer lose this poll lead?
He can lose a poll lead, but, I mean, the Tories won't win the election.
Claire?
Yes, of course he can. It's his to lose right now.
It's his to lose. Denis?
I think he will emerge as Prime Minister. But I'm worried, because I know my beloved Labour Party, if he doesn't have a very big majority, just 2 or 3 people who are not very happy with his line can cause havoc by not voting Labour in a small majority government.
Denis, Norman and Claire, thank you all for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here in London, goodbye and thank you for watching.